Hi, it's Davina. I'm in my Say I'm Not the Only Bee in Your Bonnet t-shirt, and we're in my kitchen. And today we're going to make another fancy breakfast using the other muffin. Now, I've explained how basically all quick breads are the same, whether it's cookies or scones, biscuits or pancakes, waffles or crepes. They're all basically the same ingredients. You've got your flour, a little bit of sugar, some sort of leavening like baking powder or baking soda with some sort of acid, and you add in a liquid, sometimes milk, sometimes some egg, sometimes just water, and boom, in the right proportions, you get your quick bread. Well, there's another muffin out there, not the regular ones that we think of that are almost like cupcakes. It's called the English muffin. The English muffin doesn't actually use baking powder as its leavener. Instead, it uses yeast. The English muffin predates the invention of baking powder. In fact, baking powder wasn't invented until first isolated by Nicolas Leblanc in the 1790s. It wasn't until the solivary process was introduced in the 1860s that industrial scale production became possible. 1860s. So, yeah, any muffins or breads or things like that made before basically the American Civil War, anything pre-Victorian, used yeast, not baking powder. So, I'm still going to use my homemade baking mix, but I need to modify it using two things. One is yeast. The other is some buttermilk powder. Now, why buttermilk powder instead of regular buttermilk? I could totally use buttermilk, but I find that having a whole carton of buttermilk in my refrigerator doesn't get used really fast. So if I have it in the powdered form, I can keep it, jarred up, well sealed. I just find it's a lot better this way. So I'm gonna take 2 cups of my pre-made baking mix, put that in a bowl. I'm gonna take a half cup of the buttermilk mix, which will give it that slight sour, tangy flavor that we expect in English muffins. And I take an extra 1/4 cup of my mix, put it in a little container, add in 3/4 cup more of warm water and active dry yeast. I don't want it boiling because yeast is alive. You've got to feed it, take care of it, keep it warm. Don't throw it into the refrigerator. So last night, I mixed the 1/4 cup of my baking mix, the yeast powder, and the water, and just let it set out with a little bit of saran wrap over the top to let it burp overnight. Now, if you remember, my baking mix has egg powder, it has coconut oil powder, and it has milk powder already in it, not buttermilk powder, regular milk powder. Some people would be uncomfortable with all that stuff hydrated, sitting out overnight. But the yeast needs to do that. So if you're nervous that in the 8 hours that you're sleeping, something dangerous might start growing in your yeast culture, you could use just regular unbleached flour and a pinch of sugar, and that should feed your yeast. But you still need to leave it at room temperature to do its thing. Minimum about a half hour to make sure that it's all living and stuff. Now, yeast, because it's alive, it will fight other things for its right to be there. It's not like penicillin where it will straight out murder bacteria, but yeast will make the environment so gassy and unpleasant for other things that they will just kind of go, ooh, somebody's eating too much beans, huh? And they will leave and not populate your yeast starter. And if you're doing a sourdough starter, you've got to kind of take care of it and culture it. I don't have a sourdough starter, but if you do want to use one, just take a cup of your sourdough starter as part of your liquid. All right, so this mix, already having baking powder in it, has a leavening agent. That's not going to interfere with the yeast. In fact, it's sort of double insurance. Now this is double acting baking powder. So this uses chemistry of acids and basics as well as heat to make bubbles in the bread and make it fluffy. Yeast uses just straight biology, and the little fungus that it is makes gas when it eats up sugars and starches. So a little bit of sugar and flour has given it plenty of stuff to do its business. Now I'm going to add my now in total 1 cup of yeast starter, that was some of this powder mixed with water, plus 1 more cup of water to make these muffins. Okay, it's a little bit lumpy, and that's all right. We're going to let the yeast do more of its yeasty little burpy business, and it's going to start working with the sugars and the flour that is in this mix. Oh wait, I forgot my buttermilk. Now buttermilk also has some sugars in it, but it also has some acid in it, which if we were using baking soda would continue with some of that chemical action of acids and basics working with each other. So if you don't have baking powder, you can always use buttermilk in a recipe with some baking soda, and you'll get some of the same effects. All right, there we go. I almost forgot to put in buttermilk. What was I thinking? Now, as soon as that liquid hit the powders, half of the double acting baking powder started to activate. And that's one reason why with cake batters and things like that, as soon as you make it, you want to pour it into your pan and get it into baking. However, with this, because we've got some yeast going on, we're going to want to wait a while. I would say minimum 20 minutes, but probably no more than a half hour. So I'm going to put some saran over the top of this, and then I'm going to talk about the pan. So what do I have going on here? Well, this is the pan that I'm going to make my English muffins in. Now, I do really love this skillet, but this skillet is not actually completely flat. It's got a little raised part there in the center. So these cans wouldn't lay flat on it if I tried to put 2 of them on there, and they're a little bit too big for it anyway. So I'm going with cast iron. You might not have a cast iron pan. If you've got a glass top stove, you don't want to use cast iron directly on those because it can scratch it up. Some steel pans have a thick enough base that they are nice and flat, but not all. So you're going to want to double check. I like the big cans. This used to be a tomato can that I snipped in half and then bent over the edge and hammered it. But you can also use a tuna fish can, particularly the larger ones are really nice. I find that if I use smaller cans, the poached egg doesn't have enough room to do its thing. I'm intending to make something sort of like a Eggs Benedict. I just happen to have a hollandaise sauce mix, but when I was growing up, it was really just some smoked salmon or smoked turkey or smoked ham with some cheese and a poached egg on top of an English muffin, and that was it. Of course, my mom didn't make homemade English muffins. We just bought them in a bag at the grocery store. Totally legit thing to do. But I want to do something fancy on a 4-day weekend, so that's why I'm doing this. I've already greased the bottom of my pan. I've greased the inside of these. If you find using butter is too onerous, you can always use a little bit of cooking spray to to just hit the inside, and that will keep things from sticking. Now, this is going to be my hollandaise saucepan that I'm going to wait until after I have the eggs made so that that's all done. The eggs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in about a tablespoon of vinegar to the water that I'm going to poach the eggs in, and that will help hold the whites together a little bit better than just plain water alone. Now, I've set this to heat up to medium-high-ish. I think technically if you have a griddle, you can set it to around 275, 300 degrees, and that'll be good. But I don't know what happened to my laser thermometer, so I'm just kind of eyeballing this. You're gonna want an ice cream scoop. This is another instance where my ice cream scoop doesn't use ice cream. Clean fingers. If you've got another pan of exactly the same size, you can set it down on top. I find that weights down the rings nicely. I don't, so I'm gonna use a brownie sheet. Okay, after about 4 to 5 minutes, you can usually get the rings off. One popped off nice. I didn't grease this one enough, it looks like. There we go. And now I'm going to flip them. Okay, these got a little bit dark, so I'm going to turn down my temp to just medium. There we go. First English muffins out. I need to get my oven warm so that these guys can stay warm while I make the rest of the breakfast. So I've got my water here to a boil, but I'm actually going to turn down the temperature until I can just see the bubbles. Now, for poached eggs, I don't know if this is true or not, but if you have refrigerator cold eggs, they don't poach as well. I don't know if that's true or not, but I believe it. So I've had these out since I started my whole breakfast. Gonna swirl the water. Take an egg, and this is another pat your head, rub your tummy moment. I'm going to crack the egg, put it in, and then continue to swirl it. Egg, put it in, and swirl. How's my egg looking? Ah, okay, that's more of a medium, so it's gonna have still a little bit of dribble. I'm gonna just set that down briefly and get a little container to collect all of my eggs so that I can then assemble my thing. Now, I want to have that a little underdone because it's going to keep cooking. Now, I undercooked all of my eggs so that when they went into the warming oven down below, they would not turn into hard hockey pucks of egg. However, if I were just doing this for myself, I probably would skip the hollandaise sauce. I'd probably just go with some melted cheese on the toasted English muffin and just immediately top it with an egg and eat it. If you don't like hollandaise sauce, you can always do a white country gravy or a bechamel sauce. You could just do melted cheese or a cheesy sauce if you wanted to. If you're vegan, you could go with a roasted tomato sauce, maybe some sliced avocado with some salt and black pepper on it before you put on your, well, I guess if you're vegan, you're not having it with an egg, but I bet grilled tomato slices would be really good. I like mine with salmon. I've got an uncle that makes great smoked salmon, so if you wanted to do cream cheese and lox, that's also great with a poached egg on an English muffin. So now it's just waiting for assembly.
Now, when I was growing up, we had these cute little insert cups that fit into a Revere-ware pot that my mom had. But I think for being a novice to the swirl water technique, batting 50% is pretty good. Just topping this with a little bit of cilantro, some salmon, the hollandaise sauce, and the egg. It's a really good, fun breakfast, looks super fancy, and will make a wonderful brunch. I hope this has inspired you. I hope you enjoyed watching. Have a great day.